Well, I only wish you could have heard what went on before we turned the cameras on, but we'll continue now. Hi, I'm Ann Northrup. This is Gay USA.
And I'm Andy Hum, and welcome to our end-of-the-year review for 2007, maybe some predictions for 2008.
If we're that organized. We have assembled a stunning and star-studded and diverse panel here because we like to hear people discuss things with each other from different points of view. So we're going to try to go over the year's events and issues and whatever we can think of with this stunning group, which we're very pleased and honored to have join us here today. So starting on my immediate left, we have Donald Suggs, currently a social marketing consultant, but a former media director of GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and former journalist, and featured in a very recent issue of The Advocate in a great big spread, because your partner is transitioning, so we'll get to that.
Article. Right, it's an article about, yes, that.
And next to Donald, Cholene Espinoza, who has been here before, who we're happy to welcome back. Cholene is a board member of the Service Members Legal Defense Network and is a former Air Force pilot, graduate of the Air Force Academy, currently a pilot for a major airline, and has been here talking about military matters and about her work in Mississippi post-Hurricane Katrina and relief efforts there. Welcome back, Cholene.
Thank you.
And finally, on the far left, sorry, that was too easy, Bill Dobbs, veteran activist, involved in many groups, including ACT UP, Sex Panic, Queer Watch, has worked in the peace movement. You were a staff member of United for Peace and Justice, frequently speaks out on civil liberties issues, quoted widely in many major papers, opposes the death penalty, helped to galvanize a debate about capital punishment around the Matthew Shepard case, in fact, led many major organizations to come out against the death penalty, longtime activist and civil libertarian. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Ann.
I think we should take advantage of Cholene's presence, since one of the most recent big stories was the 60 Minutes piece on the Army medic, Darren Manzella, who came out to his commanding officers about being gay because he was being threatened anonymously with being outed, serving in Iraq, and showed pictures of him and his boyfriend, showed video of them kissing, and the commander ended up saying, well, you're not gay, go back to work. So and then he spoke to 60 Minutes without permission. So we're all sort of on the edge of our seats about what's going on with him, and as a board member of SLDN, you may be able to give us an update.
Yes, well, thank you for asking. Darren's on his way back. He actually just landed in the United States within the last 24 hours. And to date, there's been no reaction from his command or his commander. So we don't know if maybe when he returns from leave, if there's going to be an administrative discharge put forth. But right now, it's just a don't ask, don't tell, I guess, situation.
Well, and, do ask, or do tell.
Well, his command is handling it that way, exactly. And like I said, he is back in the United States, and he's redeploying to his unit in Texas in Fort Hood. And so we'll see what the Department of Defense decides to do with it. It would be obviously very interesting if nothing happens, because that would certainly be somewhat of a silent endorsement or a message to Congress to say it's time to change this law.
Well, all the Democratic candidates for president are saying they would change it if they. And John Edwards says he thinks he can do it on his own, but Congress doesn't.
Lots of luck with that.
Is Congress really disposed to doing that? I mean, they haven't even passed a basic civil rights law for gay people.
That's a great question, Andy. I think that, well, the law itself that's sitting on their desk in the House of Representatives is a Military Readiness Enhancement Act, and right now we have 134 signatures on that. Of course, that's a drop in the bucket. That's sort of a progressive caucus type numbers even. So we think if there's leadership in the executive branch that would support it, then we could get leadership in the House, and yet we still have to get a sponsor in the Senate. So it's a long ways to go. I mean, we all know that our leaders in Congress, or I like to say use a flying analogy, they're kind of like barometers. They respond to the pressure that we put on them, and this audience has put a lot more pressure than I have personally. But to date, it's really incumbent, I think, on the American people, where you've got 80% across the board evangelical Christians and various races, religions are for gays serving openly, but our Congress members have not come around yet.
Couple of things. Personal support for Sergeant Manzella, reaction to the 60 Minutes piece, anything negative, positive?
He's received, and this is third party here, is nothing but positive feedback. Of course, his unit was deploying as it was airing, but thanks to the internet, they could watch it when they got back, and he's gotten nothing but positive feedback. And then myself, I got a number of emails from active duty heterosexual commanders saying that they wish that I'd stayed in the military, that they have gay troops. One individual, a colonel, said he has 5 members that he knows that are serving openly, and that it's a ridiculous law, and he hopes that the next Congress will pass the new legislation.
Well, I want to get to everybody, and I don't want to belabor this, but you did not re-enlist because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and you didn't want to serve under that system. Do you have a sense that things are different within the military now? Is this a rebellion on the ground by commanders? Are they just going to get rid of this policy de facto?
That's a great question. The problem with the policy is that while one commander may look the other way, in the case of Darren Manzella, and we've got dozens of commanders who have done so, and we've got at least 500 folks that we know who are serving openly gay to one degree or another, you never know if you're going to get someone who decides to enforce the policy arbitrarily. But to answer your question, I think it's a shift, and this is something that I would welcome more discussion from everyone else, in the mentality of the country, and not just. This is a case where I think we've been led by the youth in this country, where they're not willing to live an inauthentic sort of closeted life. They want to be fully open. They want to be fully embraced by their community. And especially having been an embedded journalist in Iraq myself, I know the last thing you want to do in a war zone is pretend that you're someone you're not. I mean, this is the most intimate experience that you'll share with another person, probably outside of a marriage or living with someone. So they are coming out, and people are embracing them because they see them as human beings, not some abomination or some defect.
I don't want to lose sight, while we talk about military discrimination policy, of what the military is about. With all due respect to SLDN and lots of other folks who want to ensure that there's a right to serve openly, we have an obligation sometimes to speak to very big overarching issues. The war. When I look at the coverage of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it's as if what the military does has suddenly been buried. We're in the midst of a war that's cost nearly 4,000 American lives, that's coming up on $500 billion in money, and we can't be silent about that. In fact, the American public is clearly solidly opposed to, not only is this a war, but it was an illegal war. It is an illegal war, and it was a war of a preemptive strike. So I'm a little concerned that my straight friends, thousands of young people around the country, are doing counter-military recruiting work, educating people about what the military is, and then you have the segments of the gay and lesbian community saying, let us in. And I'm reminded that years ago I helped to organize a demonstration in New York about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I was so conflicted about it that I ended up carrying a sign that said, queers are killers too.
Well, you raise an interesting point, which is this conflict, and we just ran into it with the Defense Department appropriation that included a hate crimes law, and they ended up dumping the hate crimes law because leftist Democrats didn't want to vote for the defense appropriation bill. How do we resolve these horrible conflicts?
But, well, let me go back to, I think, something that's an important distinction here, is that essentially the left wing has abdicated or basically punted in terms of having any influence on the military. I mean, here I am. I'm a very progressive-minded person. I'm someone who likes to look at what's right, not who's right. And because I was in the military, I actually was able to have an impact and have an influence and lead in a more progressive way. And I think if you just bar yourself and say, I can't be tainted by that organization, I can't be part of the responsibility of serving, then you're really not going to have any kind of progressive people in the military, and you're going to have the stereotypical sort of right-wing militant types in there. So I think that it's incumbent on, I feel it's a responsibility to serve, and that I can actually affect more positive change as a progressive-minded person serving in uniform than sitting in a protest line.
Right, and I also think that it's not just a question of the military, it's a question of what kind of military. I mean, I think that black people ran into this with the police. You know, the police have played a role in the black community. How can we ever participate in it? But if you don't, what happens? Then you have no role in sort of what happens in your community. And the truth is that you want there to be some kind of police. It's a question of what kind of police. And I think that it's very important that and I also think if you look at who serves in the military, that really changes the issue as well. I know in the black community, a lot of people go into the military because there's no jobs. There's no other way for them to get a decent education or for them to get any job training. So while I think it's important, and I certainly am very strongly against the war, to talk about those issues, the military is even a larger issue than what's just going on now.
I don't think we should be under any illusion that people in the military are going to have an impact on our foreign policy to any serious degree. And there were lots of us who stood up against this war amidst calls that we were unpatriotic or traitors. And, you know, the example that Donald brought up is interesting because both big city police forces and the military have been racially integrated, perhaps not to the degree that it might be, but the Pentagon is one of the most diverse employers and workplaces in this country. It does horrendous things, which is it creates carnage of tens of thousands of Iraqis who've lost their lives. Sometimes issues are so overarching, the death penalty I think is another one, in addition to this war, that we can't afford to be silent about it. And it's critical to say, and the discrimination, and let's be plain about what the military is and isn't.
So they don't have to be mutually exclusive.
No. But to crop it out of the picture is wrong. And when I look at New York Times stories and when I frankly survey the gay and lesbian organizations and I see that virtually none of them have said word one about the military, in many respects the campaign to get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, trundling veterans around the country, ends up implicitly supporting the war. The only major group that's not on the record, that's on the record against the war is NGLTF, and they've done virtually nothing to organize against the war.
Well, I personally could not disagree with you more from the standpoint that basically you're saying that essentially in order to have an impact then you have to be able to somehow shift foreign policy. What I'm talking about is when you're on the pointy edge of the sword, as I have been, and you're in the middle of Baghdad and you're doing a raid on some poor person's house and you're able to actually affect the way that you treat other people, you're able to affect the way that you expend resources to rebuild that community. You want people who are more inclusive, more open-minded, and who are willing to actually, put themselves out there for the benefit of all, not just Americans, but also Iraqis. And I think that a lot of people, gay people, like myself, believe that we have a responsibility at this point to, to basically to our troops and to give them the best leadership they can. And I think we have great leadership within the gay community and also for the benefit of the Iraqi people. So I think that it's, you're sitting on, pardon with all due respect, on the sidelines, and I think that we've got to, as gay people in every part of society, is fully integrate and be leaders, whether it's in a uniform or out of a uniform.
Would SLDN ever consider an anti-war stance?
I think that I can't really speak to that issue, but I think that
well, you're a board member.
Well, being that whether they would consider it, I would say as individuals, certainly everyone is entitled to their opinion. But the problem is that once you label yourself left, right, or out in the middle or what have you, now you become, that becomes sort of the focal point. Basically, it's sort of like that. That's essentially where everybody hones in and they tune you out. I mean, remember, Congress is 50-50. What we say and what we are and what I believe is that we are a pro-military member and we believe that this policy hurts all military members, gay and straight, as well as the country. So that's where we are politically. I think it does a disservice to identify with one political group.
But this does raise the whole issue of if we are asking for support for LGBT rights from African American groups, Latino groups, women's groups, etc., what are we doing for them? What are we doing for all the other causes that are out there? Can we do these things in isolation? The Employment Non-Discrimination Act actually was a product of what the Civil Rights Roundtable in Washington put together this Jerry-built bill, which only covers employment. This is back in the early 90s. It passed the House this year, but they jettisoned transgender rights out of it. That's the war. I don't want to trivialize the war, but there was a huge battle within our community over this year, and I'd like to get to that. How people are feeling about that battle, and
well, part of what you're getting at, Andy, is what happens when our allies start wondering if what we're asking for is really progressive.
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that. I think that organizations play different roles. I think the problem is that we need people to get involved from a variety of spectrums and affect the issue in a variety of different ways. That I don't think that any one group can be asked to sort of play. I mean, there are some groups that we want to play a different role. There are groups that we want to be able to deal with certain elements of our society that we may not be able to deal with because of our own personal political beliefs. The work that they do is important, even if I don't always share their attachment to the institution. It's still very important work.
Well, Donald, you have an intimate connection now to the transgender community.
Oh.
That's not a good way of saying that.
That's pretty matter of fact.
Hopefully this evening.
So I'm going to ask you for your particular point of view on the fight over ENDA and whether or not it was inclusive of transgender non-discrimination.
Well, this was something that I thought was very upsetting because regardless of where you are on the issue of, you know, being transgender and how that relates to being gay, the gay community has consistently used transgender people to sort of make the case for discrimination. A lot of the hate crime statistics are actually taken from transgendered people, or when they're not taken from transgendered people, they're taken from people often who were attacked because their gender behavior, their gender, I don't know what the phrase is we use today.
Presentation.
Yeah, the gender presentation wasn't considered to be appropriate. So I think that while we want to talk, I mean, obviously being transgender, believe me, I know, my partner's transgender, is very different from being gay, and there are very different issues being involved. I think that the discrimination, and particularly the violence, comes from the same place. It's about people not sort of conforming to society's belief of who they should be in terms of, you know, the gender that they were born.
But if we look at what happened, Barney Frank almost unilaterally said, you're not going to get this bill passed with transgender, I'm taking it out, we're going to pass it without it, which he did. Now 300 groups united in something called United ENDA, led by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, but state-based groups did it, all groups came together, and HRC was left alone, eventually supporting a bill that took transgender out after they promised not to do that. But to me what this showed was, and nobody got any sway with Congress. We were shown up to be a totally powerless movement, that Congress people weren't listening to us. We got 7 members of Congress to vote against the gay rights bill because it didn't include transgender. That's it. 7.
Well, and then they got punished by the Human Rights Campaign.
Well, let them. I mean, you know, who cares?
Well,
so,
some
I mean,
care.
Well, but
I think is,
how does that make us feel as activists?
I don't think that we're powerless. I would argue that actually the Human Rights Campaign, like it or not, has a lot of the particular political power, lobbying power in it.
But they were following in this case.
Yes. They wanted to show.
Well, we don't know.
This was a bill that was very narrow,
discussion.
number one. It only dealt with employment protections. It doesn't deal with public accommodations, housing, health care, all those things. And there was no chance that it was going to pass. So a lot of this is symbolism, which is you pass a bill and it shows that HRC has done something for its community or communities, even if it's thrown some group overboard, transgendered folks, and it gives the Democratic Party a chance to say, look what we did for you. Meanwhile, it wasn't just NGLTF that was leading that coalition. It was NCTE, was it?
Yes, National
Okay, I don't want to leave out National Coalition for Transgender Equality, which those, they didn't have the juice. So they gathered all those groups, and part of it was symbolic to say, we're with you. But in terms of building relationships with congressional representatives, the contributions, all of that kind of machinery and muscle, like it or not, is centered in HRC. And
specifically because they make financial contributions to members of Congress.
Yes. And I don't think that the United Enda Coalition was really interested in challenging what HRC is doing.
No.
And I think as a community, we need to be asking, how did Barney Frank get away with, being a loose cannon in that situation, to what is HRC? This is not the first time that HRC has been a serious problem. Look at their endorsement of Al D'Amato years ago. When the leadership of HRC came to New York City, they had plainclothes security guards with them. I don't even think there's really any anger right now.
Well, but that doesn't mean that things haven't changed. That's what I think is very interesting, and that's what I've been seeing, having a transgendered partner, particularly a younger transgender partner, because I think that things have changed radically even since I worked at an organization called GLAAD. I mean, let's not forget, they did a little ad campaign, couldn't have been more watered down or tepid. And just the notion of including somebody in that campaign who was transgender just horrified everyone. It was a conflict that had to be taken to the board of the organization. And now I think I don't think that would happen in the organization in the same way. And I just think that the way that the whole issue was looked at really breaks down generationally. I think that the political battle you're talking about, I don't think that change is going to come there. I think that's going to follow some changes in people's psyche, and things really do seem a lot different than they did in terms of people accepting and understanding. Or
one silver lining is that this raised dramatically within the GLBT realm and to some extent outside transgender issues, gender expression issues. That's all to the good.
Not just raise the profile, but I think helped gay and lesbian people understand their own transgenderness.
Yes.
That it's not, we're doing it for the poor drag queens or something like that. It was, oh, this is about us. We get punished, as you said, for crossing gender lines.
I'd like to think that understanding came along maybe a little bit. I'm not as optimistic as you that it was as pervasive. Look, I think Oprah did more on transgender issues this year than almost anybody.
Barbara Walters did.
Well, it may turn out to be more important than what's going on now, too. Because
well, what about what's going on with the presidential candidates? Because that seems to me, in this horrible realm of organized politics, to be some incremental step forward. The Democratic candidates certainly are on the defensive about gay and AIDS issues this year, and all showed up for the logo forum. And what do we think about them? And are they worth supporting? Are they worth trusting? Is anything going to change if they're elected? How is everyone feeling about the presidential candidates? Charlene?
Well, I think that we get basically, I mean, it goes back to that barometer issue, is that do you believe that, well, they just have to sort of say certain things so that they'll get elected in a general election, and then once they're elected that they'll be able to, pass the legislation. I mean, I think that we can't do any worse. Well, we could.
In a couple of he's considered the social moderate, which is absolute nonsense for anybody who's lived in New York.
Mike Huckabee, who is a mean, nasty bastard that people haven't figured out yet.
Right. And I think, honestly, the leadership on this issue really comes from us, and I think the American people are getting tired of gay people actually, sort of being the target of choice for the right wing and various other groups. I mean, it's sort of like we're really a way to raise money. Whether it used to be sort of the abortion issue, and that started to sort of go down the tubes, and they basically use us to raise money and to whip everybody up. And I think that the more people, as Donald was saying, who come out, and the younger people, the younger generation, that we're seen as human beings. And when that happens, it's just like my folks both voted for George Bush twice. They live in Odessa, Texas, and they're totally embracing evangelical Christians, and they get very upset when gay people's rights are put or were kicked to the curb. And so I think that's going to change from the American people. But
who are they supporting
it'll never
this year?
happen from. I don't know. I'm afraid to ask.
We'll keep in touch on that. Bill, electoral politics?
Even if your favorite candidate is elected, you can't get a thing out of them unless you're prepared to build a fire under them over the long term. This is true with the war, for example. It's the week-to-week, month-to-month organizing pressure. And so one way in which the GLBT realm is really weak is that we have allowed ourselves to be pulled into political parties in ways that we don't have a strong independent movement. So there will be people who are around Hillary who will say, well, we support Hillary, we're gay, and you're going to have to wait. When you have an independent group that doesn't care about supporting Hillary but's prepared to make a heck of a ruckus, that is what's going to get us territory.
I agree. Even when Giuliani was mayor of New York, if enough of us organized around an issue, you could make him back down on something occasionally. You might have to go to court to do it, but you could win. And I agree. People should not spend all their time on presidential campaigns. They should spend their time on issues.
Exactly.
Although I think that what's happened under the Bush administration is some of our, the very sort of viability of our system and our very protection under our system, I think, is threatened, and I think it's very important to get someone in there that's going to put a stop to that. I mean, everything from the patronage to, the other assaults on civil liberties. I think that if there's a time when we all need to compromise in order to come together and get.
I've always done that, and when it comes down to voting, I'm talking about what we do for the next
leading up to
11,
political
12, 13
activity
months, how my time will be spent.
But also realize that all of those things have had, whether issues that have ticked people off, DOMA or Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the resolution to go to that allowed Bush to wage war on Iraq, have all enjoyed, the Patriot Act, have all enjoyed bipartisan support.
Exactly.
Very depressing. So let's move to what I think is the top story of the year. We can all vote on our favorites, but mine is Larry Craig and bathroom sex. I'm in favor.
Bill, you were always such an outspoken advocate on this.
I'm in favor of bathroom sex.
Did you know the stuff was
Finally,
going on?
somebody said it. What a wonderful formulation.
What?
In favor of bathroom sex.
Yes,
well, there are
definitely in favor of it.
I think that part of what happened after the whole episode.
Everybody's bathroom.
As long as you're not intruding on anybody else.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of a contradiction in terms.
No, not at all.
No, not at all. In
Absolutely
Central
not.
Park, bird watchers, dog watchers, and cruisers have coexisted for decades.
Exactly.
A century or more.
And the institution of cruising in a place like a Minneapolis airport bathroom has evolved to keep things off the radar screen and make sure that these things dovetail. But whatever actually went on, what's worrisome is that we've forgotten that vice cops hunting down people for sex like that is a serious issue, and that those kinds of attacks have just increased. And many of the gay organizations are now much more interested in looking the other way and saying, well, they hauled somebody away we don't like. There are plenty of reasons to think that Larry Craig shouldn't be in the Senate, but what he did in that Minneapolis men's room is not one of them.
Absolutely.
Well, absolutely.
He did absolutely nothing wrong. And I was shocked and ashamed of the gay organizations that piled on and said, oh, we don't support public sex, or, of course what he did was shameful and awful. And I thought it was hideous.
I think the
that
task
they did
force
that.
came to his side.
Very tiny bit in the second half of a press
And the
release.
ACLU
The
defended
ACLU,
him.
absolutely. And his big mistake, of course, was denying that he had done it rather than denying that he had done anything wrong.
Well.
And the hero in this, to me, was always the Triangle Foundation in Michigan, which went to court to fight these cruiser arrests, and it took them several years, and they got rid of a law in Michigan that was allowing the cops to entrap.
They've been better. Well, wait, I'm from Michigan, but the Triangle Foundation has been better. They have been better. However, with Craig, they were the only one in a nationwide conference call that wanted to do anything, and ultimately they did almost nothing. So let's realize that I watched a surveillance film that was made in 1962 in Mansfield, Ohio, of what went on in a Cruzy men's room in the town square. Black and white. It's pretty horrifying because at the end, they're all mugshots that are shown on screen. All those lives disrupted, destroyed, you know, derailed. And all these years later, what has changed? The one difference is that we have some political capital now. We have the ability to say, stop hunting down men who are looking for hookups.
And now those mugshots are printed in newspapers as near as Westchester, New York.
Yep.
I mean, and it's certainly in the heartland. They're doing this all the time, ruining these people's lives. And again, you're just arrested essentially for being there. You don't have to do anything. You're just looking around.
Right.
You don't have to pull anything out or expose yourself. There's no proof of any of that stuff. I think since the sodomy laws were declared unconstitutional in 2003, I think police departments, in their frustration, are looking to get gay people in another way, and this is the way they're doing it.
That's true, because actually many people celebrated the Lawrence v. Stanley decision. And
Lawrence v. Texas.
Lawrence v. Texas, sorry. That's a very powerful, important precedent. However, watch carefully who gets arrested and targeted over sexual matters. We've practically made perverted justice and To Catch a Predator into some kind of spectator sport.
Another horrible thing. Well, would you agree with me that Larry Craig was the story that had the biggest impact on the American public as a gay story this year? And what do you think its impact was?
Jodie Foster.
Well, Jodie Foster is also on the list, definitely, but not quite as long-lasting, I think. You know, I am not gay, I've never been gay, as the subject of public ridicule, I think, is a very interesting formula.
Well, it would have been interesting to see what would happen to a straight politician who got caught in something, in a situation that was considered lewd, you know, heterosexual.
David Vitter was exposed as a married Louisiana congressman who was hiring prostitutes.
And when he went back to the Senate Club Club, he got pats on the back.
Who's in the Black Book? The madam in D.C.
Yeah.
As another congressman.
Well, yes, and my point is that I take Larry Craig as a way to assess the change in the American public's view of gay people. And people just laughed at him for denying that he was gay, and didn't so much stigmatize him for being gay as for denying it and being a hypocrite on gay issues and being perhaps a liar to his wife.
Well, you talk about young people, though. We've heard from some younger viewers, or at least a couple of them, who said, you know, I'm kind of horrified that you people would defend any of this stuff. I mean, gay people can meet on the internet and other ways. We don't need this stuff anymore, that kind of stuff. And what I try to explain is whether or not one thing is preferable over the other. Let's talk about the law and how people are being persecuted and prosecuted.
Well, I mean, one sort of perspective that I have on it, and talking with some different people, is that, okay, so why would you go to a public place to have sex? And the history of it is basically that these are married men in heterosexual relationships who basically will go there for sex, and they don't identify themselves as being gay. They just happen to be having sex with men. And so a guy like Larry Craig can turn around within the same basic week that he was fingered for this particular so-called crime, and write to a or someone who's pro-gays in the military constituent and say, well, you know, gays are an abomination, it's conduct-based, we should support, don't ask, don't tell. It's because that a lot of, I think, people think in this country that, you know, they're able to support these very anti-gay positions, but then go turn around and have these, you know, private sexual encounters. And the other thing about them that I've heard a lot of is that it's, you know, that it's sick in general, that somehow that what he did or sex in bathrooms is a sick thing. And I think that's something that, you know, that underline, you know, this whole issue of gays and how we're embraced by society or not, is we have to get beyond that, that we're somehow a defect or an abomination. And so when you do something that's very much out of the norm, i.e. having sex in a bathroom with a stranger, then that sort of, it denigrates gay people in general.
It's in every city in the country, and done a lot of myself over
The world.
when I was a kid, all over the world. Exactly, there were tea rooms all over the world, and I think there's a little bit of a stereotype that it's all married men.
No, I'm just saying
I know gay
that
activists. It's just a quick way to.
It's a whole range of people.
Right, it's a whole range of people. Yeah.
And
prominent New York playwrights there. I could name.
Yeah, but
just,
it's very
lots of
complicated
folks.
too. I mean, I think the whole issue of what you have access to is an important one, because I think that where I'm from in Missouri, that was kind of the only open manifestation of homosexuality. And I didn't find that very liberating at all. I ended up postponing sexual activity until I was in an environment where I could interact with people in another way. I mean, I don't look down on anyone for availing themselves of what was available, but I didn't want that for myself. And I think that it's a really different, like, if you look at like a young gay kid in the Bronx who has no outlets, who doesn't know how to get to a bar, or anything like that, and that's what's available to them. Is that really what you want, just to be available to young people? I mean, I think that it's not a question of judging it, but I think that definitely it does have a history of sort of reflecting our repression,
Donald,
as well as our liberty.
There are gay LGBT youth groups, though, in New York City.
There are.
Throughout the country now.
There are, but I'm saying that...
Google them, folks.
All these same arguments are used against bathhouses.
I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm saying that it's a complicated thing. I'm saying that this notion that it's some liberating thing, it's not liberating for everybody.
Nobody said that here. Nobody said that here. What we're concerned about, what I think Ann was putting her finger on, is this is a huge issue, and one of the unfortunate aspects of it is not only did the gay organizations not help, they actually hurt the issue,
right. And
it opened up a vein of homophobia for hipsters like Dan Savage and Rick Hertzberg in The New Yorker to say, oh, we're done with that. And actually, sexual freedom is a lot bigger than what two people do who happen to be married, gay or straight, in their bedrooms.
Oh, of course.
And
obviously.
I think we ought to reckon with sexual freedom as an issue and be very careful about feeding into these whole ideas of normal and abnormal and who can do what.
Well, yeah, and I would argue, maybe too optimistically, that the American public is ahead of all these organizations.
That's what I think is most striking.
They didn't lynch him. He is still in office, and all they're doing is laughing at him for being a jerk.
And a closet case.
And a closet case.
Even though he's not gay.
Well, maybe he isn't gay. What does gay mean?
Now there's a question.
Well, I don't think it was being discussed on that level.
Andy and I were arguing about this very thing before we started this show. I would suggest that any same-sex attraction, acted upon or not, identified with an identity or not, qualifies as gay. He says you have to be a self-loving...
No, you have to love yourself.
Personally
you just have to identify yourself that way, and he may engage in homosexual activity. He seems to. But he doesn't identify as gay, as many people.
Well, I think that's where, to take it to a slightly different take here is in terms of like the evangelical community, which is what I grew up in, and people will use the term lifestyle. Well, you're in a lifestyle. And sort of that mentality.
I'm the most boring lifestyle.
I was about to say,
but,
I'd like to define the lifestyle between the five of us that we all have in common.
I used to talk to kids at school, and they say lifestyle. I say lifestyle. I go home, I have dinner, I watch TV, I go to bed. That's a lifestyle?
Well, I think maybe that's the lesbian lifestyle. I think for the gay men, we like,
one of you should finish the
dance
point.
into a disco ball.
Why do people not like lifestyle?
Well, because you say, well, lifestyle implies that it's somehow a choice, and that it's like, what car do I drive? That's the lifestyle. So, I mean, I think
I'm not against the choice definition.
Right, me either. I embrace the choice thing too.
What are you talking about? Well, you choose
People
the way you live.
Their
political
activities.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, in terms of choosing whether you're gay or not.
Calling gay a lifestyle trivializes it. It is not a lifestyle like what color are my drapes. It is who you are in very fundamental ways, and we don't call that a lifestyle.
Well, it stereotypes everyone, because it assumes that because you share a sexual orientation, you share anything else. And, obviously, sexual orientations across all lines. A Catholic priest can be gay, and, I'm gay. I don't think we have much in common in terms of life. Well, who knows? But they're pretty natty, those Catholic priests. But beyond that, it's just trivializing.
And not everyone wants to get married, but some people do. And that movement has been moving along. New York State became the third legislative body only in the country to pass a marriage bill, an equal marriage bill in the country. California, both houses have done it twice, both times vetoed by Governor Schwarzenegger. But this thing isn't moving very fast. In fact, Florida is going to have another constitutional amendment on the ballot in the 2008 election, although they need 60%, you tell me, in order to pass it.
Yes, they do.
So it could be close,
Yeah.
but it's expected to bring out more right-wing voters in a swing
Yeah, but it's
state.
also going to bring out the unmarried straight seniors who are going to have their benefits taken away, and that's going to be a large movement to defeat it, as they defeated it in Arizona. So where are we all standing on marriage these days? And civil unions, are civil unions an acceptable incremental step? Do we want to get rid of all of it? Is this all about hierarchical heterosexual hypocrisy, as I like to call it?
It's a contract, and we should have access to it.
Yes, it's an equal right. My sister, well, I have several close friends who've been involved with people who are, from different countries. There are all kinds of benefits that are extremely important. What I think is troubling is that there isn't more discussion. I mean, all my straight friends are looking at me like, why do you guys want to get married? I mean, at a time when they are
the benefits you have.
Right. Well, no, they understand that part, but I mean, but part of the reason why that people have latched, but that's I don't think that's been just the only thing behind it. I think a lot of people like the idea that our relationships are put on the same level with and taken seriously in this. I mean, taken seriously, of course, but that our relationships are accorded some of the respect or whatever you call it, the traditional marriage has.
It's a contract for getting together. It's also a contract for breaking up. Divorce, I mean, splitting up in the LGBT community is very, very difficult because there is no structure for that. We need some kind of structure for it.
But it's
so
the
easy
crux of
the issue,
straight married people.
Well,
it's a signifier for equality.
Exactly, and it's also means something socially. I mean, it has an almost, if you don't see it as religious significance, it has tremendous cultural significance, and there are a lot of people, particularly outside of New York, who really cling to that.
It does, but that's exactly one of the reasons why single people question it, because we end up with permanent second-tier status. And I want to throw out another term here, kinship, which is I think that we need to be thinking about ways that people can join their lives together, and a variety of ways, actually, and also be able to go their separate ways if need be. So that's one key thing, which is these domestic partner arrangements and civil union arrangements, some of which encompass older straight couples, are actually very important reform. Yeah. And so watch carefully the rhetoric from the pro-gay marriage crowd, because sometimes they say, almost always they say, marriage is the gold standard. And it ends up undercutting these options, this cafeteria line that started to evolve. Another key point is religion. The way in which religion and marriage are intertwined, they can't be separated. To me, it's interesting that Deborah Glick, an out gay lesbian legislator in New York State, introduced a bill that would simply change marriage, in New York law, to civil union.
And she got nowhere with it.
She got nowhere with it, in part because the conservative impulse is to push for more marriage in the name of equality. We need to think outside the limits of equality and realize that marriage equality will not get us universal single-payer health care. It will simply get us more of the status quo. And this is one of the key things that I feel needs to be conveyed to younger gays, lesbians, sexual minorities, which is that you can think in bigger terms on how to make the world better, not just the same.
I would like to see a real in-depth analysis of the kinds of relationships and benefits we're talking about. What are we really talking about here in terms of the legal contract, in terms of the relationships people have and the benefits we're talking about?
Something like 1,500 of them.
Right.
Well, 1,138 at last count or whatever federally. But I'd like to examine whether there are other ways to accomplish these goals without continuing this system.
Well, the Republicans jump in and say, just sign some papers. That's ridiculous.
No, wait a
But what
minute.
I'm saying-
Hospital
but what I'm-
visits have actually been fixed in New York State, which is just because you're not married or not kin doesn't mean that you can't visit somebody in a hospital
Why
room.
should there be any restrictions on who can visit in a hospital room? Why do we have these limitations
Or a list
in the
of people
first
you
place?
want to keep out.
Have a list of
Well,
people or
but
whatever.
I think that that's what Bill was saying, is that, I mean, and I really agree with this, that if we as a society are going to accord people certain privileges because they've taken on certain responsibilities, it shouldn't just be on the basis of who they decide to partner with romantically. If I live with my elderly grandmother, we take care of each other, we have that kind of a relationship, it should protect everybody because...
But that's why
yeah.
I want to examine this.
Right.
And
But I think that the crucial issue here is that I think that gay people, a lot of people who are pushing this whole issue, want marriage. They want the cultural side, just like the
Sure.
military issue.
Sure.
I think, I remember walking into GLAAD one day and I ripped it off the wall. They had a picture of a person wearing a military uniform with like a little pink bar, and it's just like, and that really takes it to another realm. I mean, it was really about making a statement that we're just as fit, i.e. manly, to serve. I mean, I'd be surprised if there was as much support for women in the military as there was for what happened with men. You know what I mean?
Well,
I think it was just about that.
As Shalene said, we are still, to far too great an extent, regarded as sinful perverts who are somehow, filthy and disgusting. And this urge for legitimization, I think, is real and important. And I think we are not regarded as equal human beings, and I'm all for that. I want to acknowledge a diverse population, all of whom are deserving of respect and equality.
It's also driven by the baby boom, the fact that gays and lesbians have so many children these days in numbers, and they need protection from that.
Yes, they do.
Sure.
There are
But
real issues.
Co-parent adoptions, this is a live
It's
issue.
still
which
a
is,
patchwork of things that
It
you
is,
have to do.
but
It's like,
it's
why we have the
very
department-
expensive.
Yeah,
there is not a commitment, however, to recognizing that people need options, because marriage, the one-size-fits-all option, is not working. That's why so many straight marriages crumble. So in constructing a different, better world, I think we got to start looking at those options more seriously.
But this is a society where people cling to those institutions. I mean, people really, and it's easy for us to say that they don't have meaning. I mean, I think it's absurd, but then I go back to St. Louis, Missouri to visit, and everybody's been partnered. I mean, it's not like here where it's like prosperity is just around the corner. You know who's around. People hook up early, they stay together for years, and fight in the parking lots of gay bars half the time. But, people really do want legitimacy, and they're living in a community where everything is oriented in that way.
I would also say that, for me, marriage is a declaration, really, is what it is.
Public, right.
It is a public declaration of your love for this other person, and so you want to declare it in front of God, if you're a religious person, in front of your family, and my sort of take is that we should just get married. I mean, without the legal benefits, okay, eventually those will come, but the gay people, that we should go ahead and we should make those commitments to each other, and I think it's a transformative experience, and I think that ultimately, as our friends and family know us as a married couple, that is again going to march this law forward to where we get the economic rights that come along with marriage.
And gay couples, lesbian couples have been doing that for centuries.
Right.
Have been doing that. But we don't have the legal recognition, and I tell my straight friends, I'm not going to your wedding unless you don't get a license, because I'm not going to celebrate you joining the club that we're not allowed to join.
Andy's quite hardline about this.
I'm serious.
He is serious. He doesn't believe anyone should go to a wedding.
Unless they refuse to get a license.
I won't go to a gay wedding.
Well, I will go to gay weddings, because they can't get a license.
Well, would you go to a gay wedding in Massachusetts?
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Okay. Invite Andy to your wedding.
No, but I think that imagine all the friends of mine whose kids have grown up, seeing their wedding picture with their gay friends who've grown up in this. I think the younger generation is going to be the key. I think that we're seeing the last gasp. A lot of this is the last gasp of a generation that's going to be gone, And a lot of these issues are going to change radically.
So you think politics is just going to follow all that?
Well, I think it's like the civil rights movement. I think that in the civil rights movement, it wasn't legislation.
We certainly cured racism.
No, I know, but I'm saying, but it wasn't the legislation that changed it. I mean, that actually legislation was out in front.
Board of Education.
Yeah. No, but
like
it wasn't. But I think that there's a change that happens in people's psyche, and that people and that sometimes politics goes before it, sometimes politics catches up with it. But I think that if you look at the attitude of younger people, even evangelicals have done a lot of polling with them, they're just not galvanized by the issue, by the same kind of homophobia.
But the civil rights movement, we didn't just drift into it. I mean, people died for it, for God's sakes, and were hosed down, as you know.
I know, but what I'm saying is that there was a lot of activity that went along, and that it didn't just center on partisan politics. There was something that happened culturally. If you looked at the media, black people were present in the media that we weren't before. There's a lot of different ways that change can happen. And I think that pinning all of our hopes on, I think that partisan politics don't shape. They reflect attitudes and don't shape them in certain ways, and I think that there is a gap between what we're seeing going on in politics and what we're seeing going on in people's heads.
And I think the polling does prove that as you look at the generational breakdowns, and that's why I think the reaction to Larry Craig is a marker, because I think it's different. And let me raise a new subject, which is censorship, name-calling. The use of the word faggot became quite a news story this year, whether it was Isaiah Washington or Ann Coulter or Jerry Lewis or General Peter Pace talking about us being immoral.
He didn't
or
use the F word, did he?
No, only in his head. Don Imus, all of that was a story this year. Should we censor people? The BBC censored faggot in a song and then just reversed itself.
I'm not for censorship, but I don't think we should reward people who just want pay people to be bigots on TV.
Well, censorship, I think, is trying to use usually state apparatus to prevent people from expressing themselves. I think we have a right to respond to what people say. I mean, I think that if someone says something homophobic, you have a right to. And that extends to not patronizing people that advertise on that show. We've certainly, I think with the gay community, that's another example. Something happened that was bigger than that. Believe me, it wasn't the advertisers. It was people within the industry. I think it was, society as a whole. But I think that definitely that people...
And Imus is back and nobody cares.
We care.
I care, but I wonder if it'd be interesting to see what the role of those people is now. I mean, we're also used to an era when they drove politics in a very different sort of way. I'd be interested in seeing what the effect of Imus or someone is right now.
I want to know if those big politicians and media people are still
Frank
going
Rich,
on his show.
big liberal from the New York Times, is a regular guest.
Any opinion? Are you staying mum on this?
The first impulse often, if you hear of many people in this country, if they hear something they don't like, is to want to shut it up or shut it down. And that actually is a bad thing. We would have never been able to have all the discussions about those of us who are sexual minorities without the public's ability to put up with things that they didn't like. So I think there's something beyond censorship, which is...
In other words, we would have been shut up.
Yes, and we were. In fact, we were shut up, shut down, and there are still boycotts against Ford for giving money to gay causes and all. And sometimes the only way to teach with these, I think, to get people to understand these episodes that involve free expression is to find a mirror image. And you can look at Imus, or you could look at, there was a documentary that was supposed to air on a lot of public TV stations about gay and lesbian parents. Over and over in various cities, it was knocked off the air before it could view because of pressure from people who didn't want to hear or see about us.
Well, even look at the history of gay publications in the city. I mean, I remember QW, before they even opened their doors, people had a stance, where it would have been possible for, I got a subscription, wrote for them, and then railed on. But that's the other thing, too, is that we do have a stake in preserving freedom of speech, because we were originally deemed obscene or warped or demented, you know, ourselves. But unfortunately, GLAAD started by shutting down some of the journalists at the New York Post, who were saying that we were degenerates and we deserved to die of AIDS.
They're still saying that at the New York Post.
What's wrong with protesting those people?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It depends where you draw the line, which is it's one thing to protest Dr. Laura. It's another thing to say her TV show can't even air so that we can make a judgment about her.
Well, I mean, you know, that's not like standing on a soapbox in Hyde Park. That's a commercial enterprise that is sponsored. You know, come on.
So is Ellen DeGeneres.
That's where the difference in...
We don't like her either.
Right.
Please, let's hear it.
If I had to choose.
I don't watch the show.
If I had to choose.
I am mad that she's crossing a picket line, but all right.
That she was one of the first.
That's the smallest problem with Ellen.
You know, General Pace is the exception to that list because he's in a military uniform. He's representing
he was unbelievable.
And he's giving his personal opinion about gay people, which is obvious that has influenced his public policy, which in some ways it helped service members of the Defense Network because it showed Don't Ask, Don't Tell is about homophobia. It's not about military readiness.
Hey, we only have 2 minutes. Has anybody not been able to say something they want to say? Bring it up now. Get us started.
I don't want to forget General Pace's day job, which is running the war.
Well, none of us are going to forget that.
I don't think we're going to run out of things to talk about in 2008.
No, and we haven't gotten to international issues, and I think the other big story that we haven't approached was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his reference to no homosexuals in Iran and the laughter that provoked. Again, like Larry Craig, I would call that a marker. We haven't mourned the deaths of Barbara Giddings and Alan Barabay and Bob Hattoy and Bob Kohler and Jane Rule, and I would add Merv Griffin.
Oh.
And Jerry Falwell, actually. Well,
Morning.
Maybe not. And good things around the world. Nepal's Supreme Court has just ordered non-discrimination
Uruguay
laws.
just did civil partnership.
Yeah.
Didn't Mexico City also?
Yep. A lot of the world is way ahead of us.
That's the good news.
And a lot of the states are way ahead of the federal government here and in passing laws for benefits and non-discrimination, and that's very good.
More celebs came out. David Hyde Pierce, after 24 years in a relationship.
I think Bill's right. Jodie Foster is the major one there. Finally. Susie Orman coming out.
Which was great. I thought the way she handled it was
get her on this show and let her give advice to gay and lesbian couples.
Yes, exactly.
All right. I'm about to wrap up unless any last words from everyone?
Just thinking about Kurt Eichenwald, the ex-New York Times reporter who sparked an anti-gay witch hunt, and how interesting it was in the last year that more of the truth about all that came out, although very little attention given by gay and lesbian community media outlets to it.
More about that. We are rolling here a list of our very wonderful donors who supported us in the last year when we finally got around to holding a fundraiser. We're very, very grateful to them, each and every one, and we thank all of you for watching this last year and all the years we've been around, and we will be back next year with more of the same. And we thank Bill Dobbs, Sholene Espinoza, and Donald Suggs for being courteous and gracious enough to come in here and join us for our end-of-the-year show.
And thanks for being together with me for another year, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. Have fun in London.
Thank you. See you, folks. I'll be gone for a week.
Yes, he will. And Chris Cooper will be here guest hosting next week.
The gayest play in New York is Edward II. That's all I'm going to say.
And we will see all of you next year. Goodbye.